Good morning, everybody. And first of all, thank you very much indeed for allowing me to present online. I am very sad not to be there with you, but still I am very happy to be able to present nevertheless. So thank you very much. Music is an art of time. It organizes time into a form of syntax. Both the composition and the experience of music are grounded in a dynamic of tension and release, in a play of expectations that may be fulfilled or frustrated. Although even the frustration of expectation can produce pleasure by introducing an element of surprise into the listening process. The way we listen to music relies on numerous aspects of musical discourse, such as harmony, tempo, rhythm, dynamics, and motifs, through which the symbolic content of music is conveyed. The study of these expressive features belongs to the field of musical rhetoric, a discipline particularly developed and passionately pursued in the German speaking world. In this presentation, I will discuss a motif that I have identified in a well known sacred composition by Palestrina, which was later taken up by Bach on several occasions. Psalm 43 or 42 is one of the most beloved texts in sacred literature, celebrated for its profound mystical significance and its deeply poetic imagery. The deer, longing for flowing streams, a symbol of the soul's thirst for God, is an emblem of the human yearning for the infinite, a longing that marks every person who seeks transcendence and the one who, from within absolute transcendence, chooses to enter into relationship with humankind. Giovanni Pierluigi da Palestrina's setting of this text, particularly relevant this year as we mark the 500th anniversary of his birth, is justly renowned. In the purity of a deeply spiritual language, Palestrina makes use of intensely human musical elements that communicate the poignant desire expressed in the psalm. On the word desiderat, longs for, in 3 out of the 4 voices, he introduces a musical motif consisting of an ascending fourth, followed by a fragment of an ascending scale. In tonal harmonic terms, the motif outlines the triad's key degrees, the fifth, the tonic, and the mediant, with the scale connecting the tonic to the mediant. Both the musical and verbal accent fall on the tonic. This musical gesture clearly conveys the idea of desire, a longing for something high, expressed through the upward motion toward the upper register. The upbeat, downbeat rhythm and the dominant tonic relationship drive the gesture forward gently, culminating in the mediant. Bach studied Palestrina's music closely throughout his life and used it as a model for the stile antico sections of the B minor Mass. He also produced adaptations of one of Palestrina's masses, bearing witness to a lasting and profound interest in the composer's work. The motif Palestrina uses to depict the deer's desire reappears in various works by Bach. The most striking instances occur in 3 famous arias, where the motif is presented in the very opening of the movement. As is well known, most of Bach's arias involve one or more obbligato instruments that engage in a concertante dialogue with the voice. Moreover, these arias typically begin with a ritornello that introduces the core musical material of the piece. This ritornello is usually played by the instruments before the voice enters and often reuses the same musical material. This creates a compelling structure. The mood and emotional content of the aria are first established purely by sound and then refined and deepened when the voice enters, adding the explicit meaning of the words. The motif in question is found, as noted, at the most prominent points, the instrumental openings and the first lines of the vocal parts in some of Bach's best known and most beloved arias. It can also be identified, though with slightly less emphasis, in other movements that share a similar emotional character with these central examples. The first group includes the opening aria of the cantata Ich habe genug, the aria Erbarme dich from the St. Matthew Passion, and the duet aria Wann kommst du mein Heil from the cantata Wachet auf, ruft uns die Stimme. Ich habe genug presents a particularly interesting case, since the very same verbal phrase Ich habe genug appears at the beginning of both the first and second movements of the cantata. This kind of repetition is relatively rare in Bach's output, and it gives special prominence to the opening musical gesture. Not only does this motif initiate the entire cantata, but it also corresponds to the vocal line of the first phrase, which reappears in the subsequent movement. The aria's protagonist is the aged Simeon, who holds the infant Jesus in his arms and longs to be united with him forever. He desires death itself as the means to attain a deeper and eternal union with the Lord. Here we find a reworking of the same motif used by Palestrina, an ascending sixth leap placed across the bar line, upbeat to downbeat, from the dominant to the mediant of the key. This leap is filled in by an ornament that starts on the tonic and ascends toward the arrival pitch of the leap. When repeated by the oboe, this desire motif conveys a sharp, intense yearning, so intense as to be almost painful, a sensation reinforced by the piercing timbre of the oboe. Simeon's longing is not dulled by age or fatigue. On the contrary, it burns with passion. It is not the desire for a longer life, but rather the desire for death, typically feared by humankind, as a passageway to divine union. Contrast, the contralto who sings Erbarme dich in the St. Matthew Passion, also composed in 1727, the same year as Ich habe genug, pleads for God's mercy, giving voice to Peter's repentance. In this aria, the singer is accompanied by the solo violin of the first orchestra in a poignant duet. Erbarme dich follows immediately after the narrative of Peter's denial of Christ. In what appears to be a deliberate structural parallel, the aria responds to the evangelist's conclusion of the episode with the word bitterlich, bitterly, evoking Peter's sorrowful tears, with the supplication Erbarme dich, bitterlich dich, have mercy, that opens the aria. In this case, the object of desire is clearly divine mercy, the forgiveness that the penitent soul longs for. Yet even more profoundly and inseparably connected to this, the true desire is for union with God, the very source of forgiveness. Christians who acknowledge their sin with sincerity and a genuine desire for good perceive their sin first and foremost as a barrier to communion with God. At the same time, they understand that only through such communion can sin be truly dissolved. A closely related passage opens a duet aria in the cantata Wachet auf, ruft uns die Stimme, composed in 1731, 4 years after the St. Matthew Passion. This cantata is among the most beloved and celebrated of Bach's entire output. Written for the last Sunday of the liturgical year, it is based on a chorale by Philippe Nicolai, which itself is a meditation of the parable of the wise virgins. The cantata's librettist, possibly Picander, expands on this foundation, to create a broader reflection on mystical love, the Eucharist, and eschatology. The image of the bride awaiting her bridegroom, embodying the wise virgin, the believer's soul, and the church as a whole, finds its most poignant expression in the central duet, Wann kommst du, mein Heil? This movement marks the emotional climax of the cantata, expressing the deep anguish of separation. The bass, representing the Vox Christi and the Beloved, sung by a soprano, express their mutual longing for union, a yearning and expectation for the saving love of the bridegroom. Accompanying them is the violino piccolo, a small violin tuned a third higher than the regular instrument, which was often used in Bach's time for serenades. Its higher pitch and increased agility make it particularly suited for the delicate and expressive writing in his aria. The duet begins with the desire motif, after which the violino piccolo continues to weave garlands of rapid arpeggios and ornamental figures throughout the movement. These figurations clearly evoke the flickering light of the lamp by which the wise virgin awaits the bridegroom in the night. The violin's vivid representation of the flame, its flickering, crackling, dancing, binds the two voices together. Their exchange is still, for now, a distant dialogue, separated both in space and in time. Only in the final duet of the cantata, Mein Freund ist mein, will their union be fully realized. Just as the swirling violin lines bridge the soprano and bass, so the lamp that burns through the night unites the bridegroom and the bride who awaits him. It symbolizes the bride's faith in his coming, for she would not waste precious oil if she did not truly believe he would come, her hope that he will arrive soon, and the love that binds them together and moves her to wait through the long night. The presence of the lamp's flame thus makes the absent bridegroom mysteriously present. It represents the faith, hope, and love that the bride bears for him. In this way, it is not only a sign of love, but an actual mode of loving, and in a certain sense, a real presence of the one who is yet to come. The violino piccolo, and more broadly, the entire movement, thus give musical form to this longing for union. The upward reaching desire motif, with its characteristic tension, sets the tone, then this longing is developed and elaborated in the violin's arabesques. A similar, though not identical motif appears at the beginning of the second movement of Ich gehe und such mit Verlangen, composed in 1726. The aria is assigned to bass voice, once again representing the Vox Christi. Here too, the libretto is interwoven with allusions to the Song of Songs. Christ himself is portrayed as the one who seeks, with Verlangen, longing, his beautiful bride, addressed as Dove, a familiar term of endearment from the biblical text traditionally attributed to Solomon. A related motif appears once more, with a markedly different character in the opening of the fourth movement, Ich traue seiner Gnaden, from a later cantata, In alle meinem Taten, composed in 1734. In this case, the text expresses the believer's trust and reliance on God's grace. Again, the solo voice is accompanied by a violin. Here, the desire motif communicates a sense of quiet, serene yearning, more akin to the tender desire of a child for a mother's embrace. It is less impassioned than the nuptial longing of the earlier cantatas, but no less profound in its emotional depth. We have thus seen how the motif of desire permeates, to varying degrees of prominence, several of Bach's sacred compositions, shaping them and endowing them with a particular semantic depth. Bach entrusts this motif with the task of expressing different forms of longing, each one marked by a deep tension and forward reaching movement toward the object of desire. The aged Simeon of Ich habe genug longs for death, or more precisely, he longs for union with God, with the God made child whom he holds in his arms, a union that death will render eternal and fully present. The repentant sinner of Erbarme dich, contemplating Peter's bitter tears, desires reconciliation with Christ, a reconciliation through which he may live in communion with him, and which is in turn made possible by that very communion. The bride in Wann kommst du mein Heil longs for the coming of the bridegroom, so that she may dwell with him. Christ himself in Ich gehe und suche mit Verlangen desires the soul as his bride, to enrich her with his gifts, to invite her to his table, and ultimately to unite with her through these very means. The believer in Ich traue seiner Gnaden longs for the grace that both leads to union with God and is itself a reward for the soul's yearning. The motif of desire thus expresses both a simpler and more immediate impulse, that is, the ascending forth leap that swiftly reaches its goal, and a more complex gesture, one that does not rest after its initial fulfillment but presses onward, its longing paradoxically intensified by already having glimpsed an answer. This motif clearly gives musical shape to love, specifically to that unity of love whose goal is communion between the lover and the beloved, and from which flows reconciliation, forgiveness, grace, and the soul's peaceful rest in Christ. And the love, symbolized by this musical figure, seems to encompass both dimensions that Anders Nygren famously distinguished as Eros and Agape. Contrary to Nygren, however, Bach's music and the daring words of some mystics suggest that Eros, the love of desire, may be found even in God. In a passage from St. Catherine of Siena, we seem to witness the meeting of the human being's infinite longing with a corresponding desire in God. She writes, "Yes, your desire is infinite, for otherwise no virtue would be alive in you if you served me with only finite things. I, who am the infinite God, wish to be served with something infinite, and you have nothing infinite except the affection and desire of your soul." One could thus say that in God there is a desire, eros, to give of himself, agape, a desire as infinite as God is himself. The encounter between humanity and God may therefore be understood as the meeting of two infinite desires, one belonging to the human being created capax infiniti, and the other to God, whose desire is infinite because he is. During the time of earthly life, this meeting takes the form of longing, aspiration, and yearning. I am fond of recalling that Emile Cioran, a philosopher who describes himself as an atheist, reserved some of his most faith-like, God-haunted reflections for the music of Bach. For him, Bach was the ladder of tears on which our desires for God climb. And it is significant, very significant, that many of the Bach works Cioran favored are precisely those in which the motif of desire is most evident, Cantata 140, Ich habe genug, and the St. Matthew Passion. Music, and above all Bach's music, thus becomes the expression of an infinite longing, a reciprocal longing that binds the human being to God and God to humanity. They are united not only in the fullness of love, which lies beyond time, but also in the fact that they share this very infinite desire. One may even say that the desire for union is itself a form of union, since it unites those who desire one another in the same aspiration and the same will. In Simeon's desire for union with Christ, there is already a union with the one who himself desires to unite with his faithful old prophet. In the penitent prayer, there is already the joy of the merciful Father who has long awaited his return, watching from afar. In the faith, hope, and love of the wise Virgin, there is already a communion with the one who longs in turn to give himself to her. Bach's music tells us this story through a small motif of immense expressive power. Thank you.